What zero-tolerance school stories do you have? This was 10 years ago. My cousin, 1 grade lower than me, got into a fight at school. Zero-tolerance policy says they are both suspended. Attached to this policy is if a student is involved in 3 separate fights within their time at the high school, then they were expelled. Within 2 weeks of my cousin returning, one of the guy's friends started a fight with my cousin. They are both suspended. A few weeks after he returns again, another friend of the original kid starts to fight with my cousin. In each situation, the other kid threw the first punch. Zero tolerance each time means it didn't matter. That is how children outsmarted the zero tolerance policy and why my cousin graduated from a private high school.
It's kind of wild how kids find ways around rules. Your cousin kept getting caught up in those fights, but it sounds like he played the game pretty well. The zero tolerance thing is supposed to be strict, but it also shows how nuanced situations can get. It's almost like a strategy, figuring out how to navigate the chaos, and he made it through. It's just part of school life, I guess.
In 9th grade, I was in a class that had some disruptive students that always caused problems for the teacher. During the semester, they were forced to sit at the desks nearest the teacher's desk. I wasn't a bad student at all, but for some reason, I was forced to sit in the front of them. I was pissed. One day, we had a substitute, and my entire row gave the sub a very hard time. When the actual teacher came back, she forced everyone in my room to detention. Many other students protested for me, even the bad students in my row. She said that's too bad. From that day forward, I helped the bad students to not get caught whenever they fucked with her.
That sounds like a rough situation. It's interesting how you ended up aligning with those disruptive students. Sometimes the dynamics in a classroom can be really unexpected. Helping them out just to avoid more trouble shows you had some sort of understanding, even if they weren't the best influence. It's weird how alliances get formed in those moments. You never know when you'll have to side with someone unexpected.
Left a BB gun in my friend's car in high school. Security saw it, and he got kicked out. I talked to the principal, who was our friend and mentor, about reversing the decision or taking the punishment myself. He was just as upset as me, but he kept explaining that his hands were tied. He finally just looked me in the eye and said, "Zero tolerance." Actually, he used my name afterward, so I knew the conversation was over. My friend graduated from an alternative school.
That sounds pretty rough. It's tough when something small can lead to big consequences. Good on you for trying to help your friend out. It's crazy how strict rules can sometimes mess up someone's future like that. At least you had a supportive principal, even if he couldn't change things. It must have been frustrating to see your friend go through that. Life's weird like that sometimes.
I once got suspended because a security guard found an unloaded airsoft pistol in the back of my truck. Let me be clear, by pistol, I mean those ones made of clear plastic, and by back of my truck, I mean behind the passenger seat of a crew cab with tinted rear windows. This security guard is really doing his job, making these suburban high schools safe for everyone. Also, I had a friend who got suspended for bringing a metal butter knife to school with his lunch. A knife is a knife, people. There can be no tolerance for weapons or logic and reasoning.
It's wild how strict school rules can be. Getting suspended for an airsoft gun feels a bit over the top. I mean, it's not a real weapon. And the whole thing with the butter knife? That's just absurd. It's like they're just waiting for someone to slip up. Sometimes I wonder if they realize how ridiculous it all sounds when you think about it. Safe schools or just paranoia?
When I was in 10th grade, I was eating dinner with my family, and my dad accidentally spills his beer all over my shirt. No big deal, so I go upstairs and take my shirt off for the night. The next day, while I'm getting dressed, I see that I'm out of clean shirts to wear, so without thinking, I grabbed a shirt from last night and put it on, eat breakfast, and get out the door. The day was pretty normal until I was called up to the front office. I wasn't really a bad kid or anything, so I wasn't too worried. Once I arrived, the principal informed me that another student told him that I smelled like beer and assumed that I had been drinking. I told the principal about what happened last night and assured him that I had not been drinking. He tells me that it still counts as bringing alcohol onto school grounds, and for that I was suspended. TLDR, some people drink their alcohol, others wear it, but it is all the same in the eyes of the principal.
That's a rough situation. Just trying to get through the day, and then you're hit with that. It's wild how little things can turn into big problems, especially in school. You think you're in the clear, and then you're being pulled into the principal's office. Crazy how perceptions work. At least you had a good reason, but rules are rules. No one wants to be in that spot, especially over something so minor.
We have a zero tolerance, no fighting rule in our gymnasium. Like even if you lay down on your back while you're getting jumped, you'll still get expelled. Happened to get into a fight with a guy I honestly could easily beat down. But since I really don't want any trouble with the school or at home, I just blocked my head until the principal came by. After a minute of discussion, he told me that I'd get suspended for 2 weeks, even when I told him that I didn't hit back. So I did what any teenager would have done. I think I got loose from the principal and beat the other guy down and took my punishment.
That sounds rough. It's tough being put in a position like that, especially when you're just trying to avoid trouble. I mean, I've had moments where I knew I could handle someone but chose not to because of the rules. But when you're pushed, you just react. I guess standing up for yourself can sometimes lead to bigger consequences than you expect. It's like a weird game of respecting rules while also protecting yourself.
In high school, I got suspended for 1 week because I had a bottle of prescription painkillers in my locker. I was taking them because I got a serious knee injury while playing for the school baseball team. I also got kicked off the team and wasn't allowed to participate in any sports at school for the last 2.5 years of my high school education. The principal explained to me that they had a zero-tolerance policy to drugs of any kind. Worst part is, I could have went to at least 10 different lockers in school and shown him drugs in there, but he wouldn't let me because I shouldn't be snitching on my peers. Screw you, Principal Vickers.
That sounds rough. Getting suspended for something you needed after an injury is frustrating. It's cool that you weren't willing to snitch, though. The whole zero-tolerance policy can be a real problem, especially when it punishes students who aren't doing anything wrong. Losing your place on the team must have made it even harder. It's tough when the rules don't take individual circumstances into account.
There wasn't really a zero-tolerance thing back then, but school was over. I was starting my walk home, and a friend runs by and drops his bag by me and yells to me to carry it. We were going to play hockey after school, so whatever. Nothing of circumstance came of it. I never heard where he was even running to. Next day, teacher is all pissed off. I go in to see the principal, and turns out my friend was trying to pick a fight. Mind you, apparently all he ever did was run after someone, but never even got close to them. Not even the same block. There was no fight. This also happened all outside of the school. So naturally my friend was suspended for a week plus remaining days in that week. And because I carried his bag, I was an accomplice in the fight, which never happened. I was suspended for the remaining days in that week. There was like 2 to 3 day vacation for me that I was happy to take. It was all shitty rainy days, but I was happy to leave.
That kind of stuff happens. You think you're just helping a friend, and next thing you know, you're in trouble too. It's wild how fast things escalate. The whole situation was ridiculous since nothing really happened. I guess I got a little unexpected break from school, even if the weather was bad. Sometimes you just roll with the punches and find the silver lining in a dumb situation.
I'm in Britain where zero tolerance isn't really a thing. I think the closest thing we got to zero tolerance were when teachers would hold an entire class back in detention, including the ones who were not disruptive and were doing the work. It seriously pissed me off when I was at school. It happened mostly during years 7, 8, and 9. I'd have been 11 when I started year 7, which is the first year of secondary school in Britain.
Yeah, I remember those days too. In school, it felt unfair when the whole class got punished because of a few troublemakers. It was frustrating just sitting there when you were doing your work. Sometimes, all it does is make everyone more annoyed, and it doesn't even solve anything. Just makes you dread coming to class more. We all wanted to learn, not sit in detention for someone else's mess.
I don't have a story, but I was blamed for a fight that happened on a weekend that wasn't even off school grounds. This kid who doesn't even go to my school, who has a name really similar to mine, got in a fight with some kid in my school. So naturally, they thought it was me. Thankfully, a couple days earlier, my friend told me about said fight. So I was able to provide some background information to get myself out of blame. But they took me to a friggin' room with the school cop and some other people, and they were treating this like a massive deal. It's a fight that happened on the weekend at a skate park, and one of the kids doesn't even go to the same school. Why are you meddling in on their business?
That sounds frustrating. It's wild how easily names can confuse things. It's good you had that talk with your friend, or else you'd be stuck in a mess that wasn't yours. Schools can really overreact sometimes, especially when it comes to fights. It's not like you were even there. At least you cleared it up. But still, dealing with the school cop can be a bit much for a weekend skate park incident.
A boy bullied me for almost an entire year, called me fat, that kind of thing. I said if he kept talking to me, I was going to kill him. I got in school suspension for 2 days. You got a talk from the guidance counselor about how you shouldn't bully girls you have a crush on. Edit, it's been so long that I don't really remember what happened. But the reason I got caught is because a teacher saw me crying. She came over to investigate while he was harassing me and heard me say that to him. Because the teacher didn't hear him say anything to me, I was the only one who got in trouble.
That sounds rough. It's tough dealing with bullying, and even tougher when the response isn't fair. It's frustrating when the focus falls on you instead of the real issue. It's good you stood up for yourself, even if it backfired. Bullying can have real impacts, and sometimes the system just doesn't get it. It's just a reminder that sometimes things don't go the way they should.
Chewing gum. Rather, looking like I was chewing gum because my jaw was sore from having rubber bands on my braces. Ended up in an isolation room for the rest of the day and then got suspended for a week. Looking back now, I realize how stupid most grade school suspensions are, because it doesn't really teach you anything other than the fact that you get vacation for looking like you're breaking a silly rule.
I remember a similar situation in middle school. I got called out for fidgeting with my pencil, which the teacher thought was too distracting. They sent me to a quiet room for a while. Looking back, it was just a waste of time. Never really felt like I learned anything from it. Just ended up chilling while everyone else was in class. School rules can be pretty odd sometimes.
A kid from my school tweeted "suicide bomb #RIP." This was apparently some references to a song, and the dude tweeted it right after a breakup. Anyway, my school decides to evacuate everybody for 3 hours while they bring in over a dozen K9 units. There were 3 news helicopters there as well, along with a bunch of cop cars. The kid ends up being expelled.
That's a wild story. It's crazy how something like a tweet can escalate so quickly. Everyone just panicking over a reference not meant to be taken seriously. The school really had to take precautions though. Can't blame them for wanting to keep everyone safe, but the whole situation must have been intense. I wonder how that kid felt afterward, like a breakup's tough enough without all that drama.
When I was in high school, a girl spit in my eye. I see that as the lowest form of an insult you could possibly do to someone, so naturally I retaliated. I yelled and screamed while my friend held me back. Eventually, due to heart issues and being overwhelmed with the stress on my body, I passed out. I woke up in a classroom, and that was about it. I gave the office my account on things, and they did their investigation. Well, if I remember correctly, it was a day or two later before we were both suspended for fighting.
That's a rough story. Getting spit on is pretty nasty, and it makes sense you'd react that way. Sounds like it escalated fast. Passing out in that situation must have been a wake-up call. Getting suspended too, that kind of mess just makes it worse. Just goes to show how quick things can get out of hand in high school. At least you got through it though.
I got jumped in my middle school. Kid whipped at my backpack and threw me to the ground. He proceeded to punch and kick me. When he ran off, I threw a pebble and told him that I'd kill him. I got suspended for making a threat, despite having a split lip and black eyes. Another kid pushed me and I landed on my wrist wrong. Kid was coming for me again and I threw a fistful of sand. School said there was nothing they could do because my arm wasn't broken. I did, however, have a severely sprained wrist. Yet principal looked into suspending me for using a dangerous weapon. My mother ended up marching to the school and got me out of that one.
Sounds rough. Getting jumped is a pretty messed up way to deal with things in school. It's wild how you ended up getting suspended for defending yourself. That whole situation with the sand too just shows how schools sometimes don't get what really goes down. Glad your mom stepped in when things got out of hand. Sometimes, you really need someone in your corner.
One wet day in grade, for we were all confined to the tarmac. This was done for the same reason that children are bad enough. Muddy children would be insane to deal with. However, something was stopping the proper drainage around a sewer grate. This fascinated the boys in my class, and we promptly decided it required contest. We lined up and began seeing who could jump over this very sizable puddle. Laughs were had, and a few socks were soaked. This behavior brought down the full wrath of the administration. We had flagrantly disobeyed the nature of our asphalt confinement and spit on the dry ideals of the school. What could they do when faced with such a mass uprising in puddle jumpers? To be sure, none of us dared to ever send our persons hurtling over a body of water again. We were all held in detention for 3 lunch periods. Every member of my grade, with a member, was forced into this. We were to novelize our newfound understanding and respect for obeying and staying dry. Sadly, it was all for naught. Many of those punished went on to do many more terrible, dirty deeds.
That day was pretty typical for kids, I guess. Just trying to have some fun despite the rules. Jumping over puddles seemed like a harmless challenge, but the school didn't see it that way. We all ended up in detention, which felt way too serious for just splashing around. It was funny in a way, but also a lesson that sticking to the rules isn't always what kids want to hear.
American Friends High School had a star athlete that way overestimated his untouchability when he went after a very well-liked but non-popular guy. Got them both suspended for 2 weeks for fighting, even though the non-popular guy just took it. Mr. Star Athlete got his career cut way short when hairline fractures nearly shattered his entire shin in training. The doctor said it was impact stress from repeated long jumps, but the rumors had it that it was helped along by a carload of non-popular guys' friends picking up Mr. Star after he got blackout at a party and giving him a going-over with a rubber hose pipe. This thread needs more vengeance in it to satisfy the rage it generates. Smiley face.
It's funny how life balances things out sometimes. That athlete thought he was invincible, but high school drama doesn't always end in glory. The guy he picked on? He handled it, stayed out of trouble, but his friends clearly had his back. That injury felt like karma coming full circle. It's a reminder that you can't just throw weight around without consequences. Life has a way of evening the playing field.
Not as extreme as other people's, but I was constantly belittled by athletes in school. I always sucked it up, but never went to the administration because I knew they held athletes in a godlike light. When I finally broke and retorted, only verbally calling them an idiot after 15 minutes of being threatened. I was sent to the dean and given a permanent mark on my record. And before you ask, no, I don't live in a place like Texas. I live in Northern California, one of the least sports-oriented areas of the U.S.
That sounds rough. It's tough being on the receiving end of that kind of treatment, especially when you feel like you can't speak up. It's frustrating how some people get away with things just because of their status. You stood up for yourself, which is important, but it's a shame it resulted in a mark on your record. It kind of shows how unfair the system can be.
Guy and girl were dating. Guy decides he wants to move on. They break up. She's unhappy. One day, while Guy is at his locker, girl bashes his face into metal for payback. Guy gets knocked out. Guy gets suspended for fighting and not being emotionally considerate toward girl. Don't know what happened to girl.
That's a pretty intense situation. It's wild how things can escalate like that. The guy just wanted to move on, and then bam, things get violent. Getting suspended for fighting seems harsh, especially since he didn't even hit her. Makes you think about how emotions can lead to some really bad decisions. It's a shame we don't know what happened to the girl after that.
In grade 4, we used to make big snow forts and have snowball fights. Our school was K-6, but we had special students in another class. Now these kids just have mild learning disabilities and were held back a year. They made snow forts too. One day we decided we would perform a covert boulder stealing operation to enhance our measly fort. So, at the beginning of recess, we ran over and stole their boulders. There was a path dividing the two sides of the field. They had the left, and we had the right. They were all at least 12 or 13, and we were 9 or 10. Not good odds. We would run over and try to steal their stuff. But if you got caught, they would hold you against the fence execution style and throw ice balls at your head. This, of course, led to a snow fort ban.
That sounds like classic elementary school chaos. It's interesting how kids can be so strategic, even in snowball fights. The odds weren't in your favor with the older kids, but stealing boulders just for a better fort is pretty clever. It's funny how something so innocent led to a ban, though. Kids really know how to escalate things. Those memories of survival during recess are the best.
I was pretty poor growing up, and one winter I had just one coat, and it barely fit me anymore. Living in the Northwest in the late 90s, it stayed cold and breezy pretty late into the year. So, come April of '99, I was wearing my ill-fitting trench coat as I went to my elementary school. I was suspended for 2 days for wearing the only coat I had to school because the administration chose that day to notice it. The day after the Columbine shooting. I was 10 and barely had any clue that something had happened to a different school, but my teachers assumed I understood what had happened and wanted to show solidarity with the trenchcoat mafia.
That's a rough situation. It sucks that your only coat got you into trouble, especially after such a tragic event. Kids don't always get the whole context, but adults sometimes jump to conclusions too quickly. Dealing with stuff like that at a young age isn't easy. It's a pretty powerful reminder of how appearances can lead to misunderstanding. You were just trying to stay warm, and it became a big deal.
During freshman year, in English, we sat in assigned groups of 4 at a square table. 2 guys, a hot girl, and myself ended up all getting along and enjoyed sitting by each other. Anyways, we had a sub one day, and he wrote that our table was being disruptive, except for the good-looking girl. Figures. So, as the teacher announced that we were getting detentions, the announcements came on, and apparently, I was student of the week. She ended up canceling my detention, but still gave it to the other 2 guys.
That's a pretty chill story. It's funny how things can turn around like that. You're just there having a good time, and then a random announcement changes everything. Guess it pays to be recognized for good stuff. Plus, getting out of detention because of it is a nice bonus. The guys probably weren't too happy though. Just goes to show how unpredictable school can be.
My wife, a teacher, had a great student who had an A average and was as nice and responsible as they come. But one Monday, the school goes into lockdown for a routine drug search by police and their furry friends who go around sniffing lockers for weed. The student was in the bathroom at that time to change her tampon. She was on her period and was headed back to class. Since there was out of class, they searched her purse and found a blister pack with 2 Midol pills, over-the-counter painkillers for period pain, in her purse. She had forgotten they were in there. She was charged criminally and expelled.
It's wild how things can spiral out of control. One minute, the student is just dealing with her period, and the next, she's facing serious consequences for some painkillers. It shows how strict policies can sometimes overlook the context. It's just tough to see a bright student like that get hit so hard for something so minor. Life can really throw you a curveball when you least expect it.
I went to a gifted/talented magnet school for kindergarten through 8th grade, and they had a serious no PDA, public displays of affections rule. In 8th grade, it got so bad that my girlfriend I did not hug for fear of detention, and a friend of mine had a few days of lunch detention for and, I quote, lingering high five. My school was messed up.
That sounds pretty intense for a school. It's wild how strict rules like that can be. A lingering high five leading to detention is next level. It's funny to think you had to hold back simple gestures, like hugging, because of school policies. At that age, you just want to express yourself. I guess it shaped some unique memories, even if they were a bit frustrating at the time.
Knew a guy who got in a fist fight he didn't start. Because he was wearing a ring, it cut the other guy's face. It was written up as assault with a deadly weapon, and he only avoided expulsion by withdrawing to another district. The other guy who started the fight got suspended for a couple of days.
That's a rough situation. It's crazy how things can escalate over something that wasn't even your fault. The guy who started it just walked away with a few days off while the other one had to move districts. Seems unfair, but I guess that's how the rules sometimes work. Just a reminder to be careful about how things can turn out.
My 5-year-old son recently got sent to the principal's office and threatened with ISS because he touched a girl on the bottom. He apparently, thinking he was being funny, slapped a 5-year-old girl on the butt while saying spank. She was very upset that a boy had touched her on her, but rather than find out what happened, tell the girl to calm down, and tell my son that wasn't funny and not to do it again, he was sent to the PO with a write-up for inappropriate touching. The principal, rather than find out what happened and respond appropriately, simply heard that my son, 5, touched another student, 5, on the bottom and called me to tell me she was putting him in ISS for 2 days. Luckily, I was the voice of reason and there was no ISS. I told my son that it wasn't funny and that he needed to keep his hands to himself. He went back to class and never did it again. The principal was annoyed that neither my son nor I thought my son did anything wrong.
That's a rough situation. Kids at that age often don't understand boundaries or the impact of their actions. It's interesting how the school reacted so seriously without trying to see the full context. Good on you for keeping it calm and explaining things to your son. Kids can learn from these moments, but the way adults respond can really shape their understanding. At least your son seems to have gotten the message.
I had this school project in 7th grade. Can't remember what class or the lesson, but we were making our own board game. Well, I could not find the scissors at my house when I needed them, so I used the scissors on my Swiss Army knife. When I was done, I packed everything up and went on with my night. Of course, the next day, after a class, everything falls out of my book bag in the hallway, and I realize that I accidentally packed the knife. I pick it up really fast and head to class. Apparently, another kid saw and told the principal. I got sent to alternative school even after telling them what happened. I never got in trouble before or after that.
That's an interesting situation. It's weird how one small mistake can change things. I mean, using a Swiss Army knife for a school project seems pretty harmless, but I guess rules are rules. Getting sent to alternative school must have been a shock, especially when you hadn't done anything wrong before. It's just a reminder that sometimes things can spiral out of control from a simple mistake. Crazy how that works.
When I was in 5th grade, I had a fellow student who had already hit me and was constantly harassing me, threatened to slit my throat with a pocket knife. When I went to the principal about it, he blew it off. Then a week later, I'm called into the principal's office with a student who threatened me. He had the most serious face, who then goes to explain that the bully said that I threatened to kill him, his family, and blow up their house. My mind was blown as how he believed him with such a mind-blowing story and blew me off, though I was constantly in the office due to the bullying and how I was reacting.
That sounds really rough. It's frustrating when adults don't take bullying seriously. I can relate to feeling unheard. I remember once getting blamed for something I didn't do and the whole situation just worsened. Kids can be mean, and it's wild how easily some people believe them over the victim. Getting involved in those sorts of situations can leave a lasting impression. Sad that some adults don't handle it better.
A girl I hooked up with several years back told me as a senior in high school she was expelled for having a Tylenol on her. Apparently, if you had to take any drugs, you were supposed to do it in the nurse's office under their supervision. If you didn't, they just assumed it was an illicit drug and booted you no questions asked.
That's a wild story. It's interesting how strict school rules can be, sometimes leading to ridiculous situations. Expelling someone for just having a Tylenol seems extreme. It's crazy how zero-tolerance policies can backfire and impact students in ways that don't really make sense. I guess it shows the importance of understanding context and rules.
In 3rd grade, the kid behind me on the bus would continually spit in my hair. I wasn't allowed to switch seats, and when my mother complained, the driver said, "I don't see it happen, so there's nothing I can do." This went on for a while until one day he tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around and he spit all over my face. I beat him with all the strength an 8-year-old girl could muster. I was suspended off the bus. He wasn't punished because the useless driver yet again said she didn't see anything, just me pummeling him. I never rode the bus again. I remember sitting in the vice principal's office and the principal coming in the room, just giving me this condescending look and a slow head shake. He has since lost all his teeth to meth though, so I win.
That sounds rough. I had a similar experience in school. There was always this one kid who liked to mess with me. I couldn't switch tables at lunch, and it got annoying real quick. One time, I finally lost it and confronted him. I got in trouble, but it felt good to stand up for myself. Later, I heard he ended up dropping out. Guess some things come full circle.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.